Today, housing affordability blown to bits. Hi again, it's Martin North from Digital Funds and the latest posts covering finance and property news. Whichever way you look at it, housing affordability in Australia is shot. Cotality, formerly CoreLogic, reported that the total value of Australia's housing stock was a massive $11.3 trillion as at April the 30th, 2025, with the average home worth exactly $1 million. This is a leech on the economic prosperity of Australia and a massive misallocation of capital that has ultimately harmed productivity, equity, and the broader economy. But as a result, a record 34.4% of homes across the nation were valued above $1 million in April, with 41.6% of capital city homes priced above $1 million. Sydney was the worst affordable, at 64.4% of homes valued above $1 million. Eliza Owen, the head of research at Cotality, said the trend reflects strong price growth across Australia's housing market, where values have increased 67.3% in the past 10 years. The average property value to $1 million has theoretically made Australians some of the wealthiest people on the planet. According to the UBS Global Wealth Report, Australian households have the world's second highest net worth. Of course, incomes have not followed suit, which is why there's a massive gap now between prices and income. In reality, most of Australia's wealth is actually illusory, and expensive property is gradually strangling the broader economy. Australia is significantly overweight in housing, 4.5 times GDP, and slightly underweight in shares at 1.2 times GDP. And Australians invest more of their wealth in housing and less in shares than other English-speaking countries. The comparison with the US is particularly stark, with US housing valued at barely 1.7 times GDP and shares valued at 1.75 times GDP. Now, Cotality argues that Australia's million-dollar housing markets are in part a reflection of our wealth and prosperity as a nation. After all, housing markets wouldn't have $1 million price tag if at least some Australians couldn't come up with that level of finance. As values continue to rise, the chance that homeowners hit millionaire status increases, opening up new opportunities for further investment or accessing that wealth through the sale of a property. However, the downsides of such an extraordinary price point are also increasingly evident. The rate of home ownership has gradually declined over time, particularly among younger, low-income households, where incomes cannot keep pace with growth. The average age of first home buyers has increased, and increasingly wealthy households are stuck renting for longer, which increases competition for low-income renting households. Housing debt has also blown out to keep pace with rising values relative to more subdued wages growth. Household debt relative to income was recorded by the RBA at 135% at the end of last year, albeit down from a high of 139% before the bulk of cash rate rises in September 2022. This was up from 122% a decade prior. Australia's banks have grown into giant building societies that prioritise lending for housing over productive businesses. Compared with the 1990s, where 2/3 of finance went to businesses and 1/3 went to housing, now it's completely reversed. According to the 1991 census, Australia's home ownership rate was roughly 5% higher than it is today. Homes cost around 3 times income compared to 8 times today, and household debts was 70% of income compared to around 180% today. One indicator is the average loan size, which in New South Wales is now a massive $800,000 according to the ABS, but all states are seeing significant loan increases. No surprise, of course, as people are getting more leveraged up to get bigger loans. There is a direct correlation between lending and home price growth, in that when lending booms, so does home prices, whereas when lending slows, so does prices. Incidentally, the latest ABS data shows that housing finance data for the first quarter of 2025 declined by 1.6%, taking the rate of annual growth down to, well, a mere 14.2%. Wages, of course, have not grown anything like that much. This was the first quarterly decrease since the first quarter of 2023, driven by a fall in lending to owner-occupiers, down 2.6% across the quarter, and investors down 0.3% across the quarter, with first home buyer lending declining by 3.2% across the quarter. The percentage of income required to service a new mortgage on a median-priced Sydney home was also well above the other capitals and is tracking close to record highs in April. Our analysis of financial pressures on households reveals that more are struggling to pay mortgages or rents. And of course, we look at it at a postcode level and compare disposable income with payments for rents and mortgages. And in many cases, it's now above 50% of income. People are just hoping for an RBA miracle next week to cut rates to relieve the pressure. But this is a structural issue created by decades of bad policy, from negative gearing and tax breaks to financial system deregulation, coupled with poorly conceived schemes to, quote, assist first home buyers into the market, and other policies which ultimately lifts prices even higher. Actually, Westpac noted that Australia's housing upturn has lost much of its momentum recently. Overall, the picture in early 2025 is of a housing upturn that has lost considerable momentum, they said. While the RBA's February rate cut generated some positive response, particularly in the softer Sydney and Melbourne markets, turnover has been soft, with moderating price growth in the previously strong middle-sized capital cities of Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, also a prominent feature. The weakness in construction-related loans is also of note, suggesting the lift in dwelling approvals in recent months is likely to fade. All up, the picture is of a housing upturn that has lost much of its momentum and a sector that may continue to lack direction near term. Now, for another perspective on housing affordability, the Demographia International Housing Affordability Report for 2025 was released this week. As they say, with any problem, the first step towards a resolution should be to understand the basic facts. In its 21 annual editions, Demographia International Housing Affordability has robustly documented the deterioration of housing affordability. Housing affordability measures necessarily relate the costs of housing to income, and Demographia uses the median multiple, a price-to-income ratio that divides the median house price by the median household income. The annual report assesses housing affordability in 95 major markets across 8 nations: Australia, Canada, China, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, the US, and the United Kingdom. The 2025 edition covers the third quarter of 2024. Because housing is usually the most expensive element of household budgets, this deterioration has been the principal driver of the present cost of living crisis, they say, affecting the middle and working classes. Generally, housing affordability is worse and the cost of living is higher where land use regulation is most restrictive at the housing market, particularly the metropolitan areas. This is because one of their theses is that land supply is part of the problem. They use a scoring system where housing markets are rated from affordable to impossibly unaffordable based on their median multiple. This impossible affordable score, by the way, is new, reflecting the deterioration seen across many markets. Housing markets are labour markets, they say, which are also metropolitan areas or functional urban areas, largely defined by the commuting shed. Housing affordability comparisons can be made between housing markets, such as a comparison between Adelaide and Melbourne, or over time within the same housing market, such as between years in Adelaide. The least affordable market in the 2025 report was Hong Kong, with a median multiple of 14.4, followed by Sydney at 13.8, San Jose at 12.4, Vancouver at 11.8, Los Angeles at 11.2, Adelaide at 10.9, Honolulu at 10.8, San Francisco at 10, Melbourne at 9.7, San Diego at 9.5, Brisbane at 9.3, and Greater London at 9.1. All of these markets were rated impossibly unaffordable. Sydney was the least affordable market in Australia, with an impossibly unaffordable median multiple of 13.8, making it the second least affordable market internationally, ranked 94th in affordability out of 95 markets. Sydney has had the first, second, or third least affordable housing of any major market in 16 of the last 17 years. Even the smallest Australian market, Adelaide, endures an impossibly unaffordable median multiple of 10.9, ranked 90th amongst the 95 markets. And Melbourne, with impossibly unaffordable median multiples of 9.7, is the 87th least affordable. Brisbane was an impossibly unaffordable 9.3 and ranked 85th out of 95. And Perth, at 8.3, was the 82nd least affordable market. It's remarkable that these markets are less affordable than widely recognised world cities like New York, London, or Chicago. And by the way, across in New Zealand, where Auckland has a severely unaffordable median multiple of 7.7, is actually improvement from the 8.6 in the last pre-pandemic year of 2019. Important drivers have been strong income trends, combined with a recovery of about half of the COVID-era demand shock. And it's also like the Liberal land use reforms announced by the coalition government elected in 2023 has become discounting overly expensive land prices. To its credit, they say, the New Zealand government has adopted a program that should lead to much lower suburban and ex-urban land prices, leading to materially improved housing affordability. Now, Demographia International Housing Affordability uses a price-to-income ratio, the median multiple, to rate middle-income housing affordability. The median multiple is a price-to-income ratio of the median house price divided by the gross median household income. Price-to-income ratios have been widely used, such as by the Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank, the United Nations, the Organization of International Cooperation and Development, or OECD, the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University, and others. Median measures better reflect the housing affordability impacts on middle-income and low-income households, they say, as opposed to averages, which are skewed upwards by the inclusion of the highest income and prices. Now, to be fair, others suggest the methodology is, to quote Cameron Murray, the worst possible way to evaluate housing affordability, arguing that the sale price of homes is not the economic price of housing. Prices, in the economic sense, are the relative cost of consuming newly produced goods and services. The economic price of housing is therefore the rental price. It represents the price of being housed today. The rental price is what goes into consumption price indices. It goes into the national accounts to represent housing service production. It is what standard economic theory says is the price of housing. The sale price of a house represents the purchase of a perpetual stream of housing services. So in essence, you are buying the right not to have to rent a home from someone else. Why it is important that the sale price is not its economic price? Well, because sale prices of housing can rise while their economic price can fall. The economic price of housing translates into a sale price via other factors. So you can pay your money and take your choice as to whether the methodology works. But standing back, however you look at the problem and whichever data set you go with, housing affordability has been blown to bits. So it's all the more concerning that the newly re-elected government is continuing the same well-worn path of interventions and taxpayer support, which will force prices higher. Labour's 5% deposit scheme for all first home buyers will kick in on the 1st of January 2026, further stimulating the housing market, and of course the RBA cuts of some sort are incoming. Actually, we need to address the elephants in the room. Yes, there are many elephants trapping around, such as too high migration, too much bank lending, too little supply of new property, and the old chestnut of too many incentives for property investors. Australia's high housing prices have had a negative impact on the younger and future generations, and it requires them to pay substantially more for shelter than otherwise. Actually, whether a home is worth $500,000 or $2 million, it serves the same purpose, which is shelter. For most people who merely live in their homes, greater housing wealth actually holds little significance. The economy would also be more balanced and productive if capital had been directed towards businesses rather than inflating housing values. But we are where we are. So the question is there going to be any change of tack from the government? Probably not, which means that we're going to live in a world where housing affordability continues to deteriorate even further. And that's not good news for anyone trying to get into the market. But of course, it is good for the vast majority of people who are sitting in properties that are magically rising in value for no real good apparent reason. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.